welcome to CEC Curricle Lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss R.K. Merton's book Social Theory and Social Structure. Today's lecture is going to focus on chapter 5. In the previous lecture we had focused on chapter 4 where he was talking about how there is a mid-range theory which is kind of different from generalization, and on one side we just don't do theory, and on the other side we just don't kind of do empirical research. So, there is a connection between theory and research. In chapter 5 of the book, Merton is talking about the way in which research contributes to the development of theory, and he outlines 4 tasks. One is the kind of the serendipity pattern from which new theories develop. Then it could also lead into the reformulation of theory where some set of data was not considered as pertinent, and if it is re-examined it leads to the reformulation of theory. In this lecture we will talk about the second 2 impacts of the research theory. So, just do a recap. The 4 impact of research on theory is that research can uncover unexpected serendipitous finding that lead to the development of new theories. The repeated observation of previously neglected facts can pressure a theory to be reformulated to include these new variables. The invention of new research procedures which make certain areas of study more accessible can shift the focus of theoretical interest. The practical requirement of empirical inquiry force research to precisely define and measure concepts that might otherwise remain vague in purely theoretical discussion. So, the 2 key findings that he talks about in order to understand how reformulation takes place is to introduce a study of mass persuasion event involving radio star Kate Smith selling war bonds. The purpose of this example is to show how empirical data can pressure the recasting of a specific theory. Merton focused on the first of 2 significant facts that emerged from the study. First was public disenchantment with persuasion. Many of the New Yorkers interviewed who had pledged to buy a bond from Kate Smith expressed a deep disenchantment and resentment towards advertising and propaganda. The informants felt that they were being manipulated through a pattern of pseudo-Gemeinschaft. This refers to a fake sense of personal concern and friendliness used by salespeople and advertisers to manipulate the audience more effectively. So, we are kind of using the research is using new concepts in the way Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft was developed to understand the difference between community and society. Now, here we are trying to understand a concept called pseudo-Gemeinschaft, which is not the actual community get together feeling, but a fake sense of belongingness. The informant felt that they were living in a climate of reciprocal distrust or anomie where genuine values had been replaced by private interests and society was seen as an arena for rival frauds. The first finding highlights a contradiction. People who are successfully pledged a bond were simultaneously expressing a profound distrust of the very method of mass persuasion that had influenced them. This phenomena challenged existing theories of persuasion and propaganda by introducing the powerful but previously neglected variable of public distrust and anomie. Merton discusses the second key finding from a study on war bond drive led by the radio star Kate Smith. Despite a general distrust of advertising and propaganda, a large majority of the New Yorkers interviewed, that is 80%, believe that Smith's sole motivation for the bond drive was to help the war effort. Only a small fraction, that is 17%, thought she was also interested in personal publicity. Now, here Merton talks about the paradox of sincerity. The belief is a paradox because Smith was a professional radio star who appeared on numerous commercially sponsored programs each week. In the public eye, she was the direct opposite of manipulative, phony promoters her audience resented. Merton concludes by posting a series of research questions that this finding raises. Number one, why did Smith become the specific object of faith for so many people who were otherwise distrustful of society? Number two, what are the social psychological sources of a public image as sincerity incarnate? Now, these questions highlight how the surprising empirical data forces a deeper theoretical inquiry into the dynamics of public trust and reputation in a modern commercialized society. The marathon bond drive itself was the source of the enhanced public belief in Kate Smith's sincerity. The drive format, which was perceived as a sacrificial ritual, directly contributed to her reputation. Merton presents evidence from the study to show that marathon drive and not just pre-existing fandom was the cause of the heightened belief in Smith's sincerity. Researchers compared people who heard the marathon broadcast with those who didn't within both groups of regular fans and non-fans. The findings showed that a significantly large proportion of people who heard the broadcast, regardless of whether they were the fans, believed in Smith and her exclusive patriotic purpose. This snapshot in time caught the process of reputation building as it was happening. The intense interview revealed how the broadcast achieved this effect. The marathon's atmosphere of determined, resolute endeavor under tremendous difficulties led listeners to perceive her effort as a sacrificial ritual. Listeners noted signs of her fatigue and projected themselves into her experience, feeling empathy and concern. The reports from her co-host Ted Collins reinforced this feeling of brave exertion. This shared experience of her perceived suffering made her seem more genuine, transforming the event from a mere broadcast into a powerful reputation enhancing ritual. So, Merton kind of further argues, looking into this two examples, that in a climate of public distrust, the propaganda of the deed is far more effective than the mere talk. Listeners could verify that Smith was actually devoting an entirely day to the task, an incontrovertible evidence that her words could not provide alone. This direct testimony of her behavior converted the initial skepticism into a full-fledged acceptance of Smith's integrity. So, what is the implications of these research data for theory? And here, Merton uses the analogy of a currency reserve. Words, the currency of talk, were accepted because they were backed by conduct, that is, the gold of action. The marathon served as a fulfillment in action of a promise in words. This case study, like the one about Malinowski, demonstrates how empirical research can introduce new variables into an existing theory of mass persuasion. It suggests that the propaganda of the deed is a powerful mechanism for building trust, as it allows the audience to draw their own conclusion from the observed actions, making them feel less manipulated. The third role of research in theory building is refocusing of theoretical interest. Empirical research impacts the development of theory by introducing new research procedures that shift the focus of theoretical interest to areas where data is readily available. New research methods generate novel data that was previously unavailable. This influx of relevant facts stimulates fresh hypotheses and allows theorists to test them immediately rather than waiting for data to appear by chance. So, now that we have more new methods of data collection, and it kind of helps us to capture even those data which initially would have been difficult, and the researcher would wait for a chance for the data to appear. Now, that danger is no longer, and therefore, the field with new effective research technique advance more quickly as hypotheses can be verified on the spot. In contrast, areas of theory without such procedures may stagnate. As a result, the attention of theorists naturally shifts to the more fertile areas of research. Merton uses a theory of propaganda as an example. While historical events were a major factor in the growing interest in propaganda, the development of new research method also played a crucial role. So, we have new techniques of data collection, and these new techniques are helping us to reformulate the theory because we are kind of getting more and more data. So, the techniques like content analysis, panel technique, and the focused interview made it possible to systematically collect data on propaganda, thereby directing theoretical attention to this area and accelerating its development. Several examples of how the invention of new research method has shifted the focus of social theories are mentioned. The interest in the theory of personality formation in relation to social structure increased significantly after the introduction of new psychological technique like Rorschach's test, thematic perception test. So, these methods are providing new ways to gather data on personality. The development of sociometric technique by Moreno and others, along with advances in the passive interview, revived theoretical interest in interpersonal relations. These same techniques contributed to the rediscovery of the primary group. This led to a new focus on how informal social structure act as a link between individual and large formal organization, leading to a new body of literature on the topic. Merton predicts that the recent introduction of the panel technique, and what is a panel technique is basically you are kind of repeatedly interviewing the same group, and in the process of repeatedly asking the same question, different version comes up, and then it is up to the researcher to kind of clarify these findings through different sets of questions. So, the panel technique sharpens the focus on social psychologists on theories related to attitude formation, political participation, and behavior in situations with conflicting role demand. The availability of new research tools directly influences the direction of theoretical inquiry by making a certain topics more accessible to study. So, we know that there were kind of many, even in psychology and sociology, areas which were difficult for researchers to go and study, but now they are new areas, new techniques, new methods of data collection, and this has kind of opened up a whole new areas of research, and in that process contributing to new theory. So, sociological statistics, when organized into theoretical relevant categories, have a significant impact on theory development. In the past, Sociologists were limited by pre-collected data, not designed for theoretical purpose. This change is seen in several areas. So, the shift in the data availability, which were not there in the earlier period, is seen in different disciplines or subdiscipline. One is social psychology. The call for statistics on attitude, opinion and sentiment, you have all these tests to kind of map out your attitude, your opinion and various kind of psychological testing. So, these kind of sketching are now kind of having a very strong influence on theory building. The second instance of data availability is community studies. Researchers are generating statistics on class structure, associational behavior and clique foundation. The third area of data availability is ethnic studies. The field is starting to produce quantitative data that is reorienting theoretical focus. So, while the sheer accumulation of statistics doesn't guarantee theoretical progress, the availability of pertinent quantitative data does tend to shift theoretical interest. Theories naturally focus on areas where new and previously unobtainable data can be utilized, leading to new directions of inquiry. This may at times divert attention from more important problems to those with promise of immediate solution, but the overall pattern of research procedures influencing theoretical focus remains clear. The fourth role of research on theory is the clarification of concepts, and this kind of is very important. Many a time when we are kind of going through theories and we are reading the literature on it, our concepts doesn't get clear. It can only be clarified when we empirically test these concepts. So, Merton says that the significant portion of what is called theorizing involves the clarification of concept, a task that is essential but often neglected in social science research. So, a concepts can have multiple meaning, but in a particular research it would in a specific cultural context it will have a different meaning or a subjective meaning, and it is very important to have clarification of these concepts. Only then the data analysis or the theory building can be fruitful. So, Merton criticizes a practice he calls methodological empiricism, which is the design of research focused on establishing causal relationship without properly analyzing the variables involved. He argued that much research, while methodologically sound, example for controlled experiment, fails to define its variable in terms of their conceptual element. Merton cites studies that show a correlation between rehousing slum family and improved living conditions or the effect of foster care on children's intelligence. While these studies advance research procedure, their findings do not contribute to cumulative social science theory because they don't explain the underlying nature of the variable. Merton states that the empirical research, due to its practical needs, often forces conceptual clarification. A basic requirement of research is that its concept and variables be clear enough for the researcher to proceed. This clarification often takes the form of establishing observable indices for the variable. So, you know these are all connected, variable, indices. So, you develop a set of indices for each variable so that these indices will help you to clarify the concepts. So, it is easy to speculate loosely about concepts like moral or social cohesion, because these can have multiple or subjective meaning, but you need to, as a researcher in your specific context, be very clear what moral means, what social cohesion means, and for this how will you kind of map it out in terms of what is the exact meaning, is to kind of develop indices and check the various diameters for the clarification. So, but a researcher must devise precise and clear indices to systematically observe them. Merton mentions operationalism as a clear example of researcher demanding that concepts be defined clearly enough for them to be measured and studied. So, you have to kind of be very clear right from when you go to the field, to be clear what are the variables that are going to be used in this study, and the correlation between these variables has to be clear. So, once these variables are identified, that means you are operationalizing your research, and concepts can be have to be defined. So, whenever we read a research paper, we know that there is kind of set, or either in the beginning of the research or towards the end, where it is elaborating the various variables and the meaning of that variable in that specific context. So, research cannot move forward without a clear understanding of the concept it is trying to measure. And why is concept clarification needed in social science, especially sociology? Because each of the concepts can have multiple meaning, and until and unless the researcher is clear in terms of which subjective meaning is being studied, the relationship between the other variables and even the terms of kind of data analysis would remain kind of incomplete. So, why do we need indices? You know, once we need to be very clear that what are the variables in the research. We need a concept clarification, and to have concept clarification, Merton suggests the need to develop indices. Now, he explains that empirical research forces the clarification of sociological concepts, a process that is essential for moving from abstract theory to systematic investigation. Now, a lot of reality, empirical reality, are also at the level of abstraction. So, when we are doing research, we are not kind of dealing with certain ideas or certain abstraction. We need that empirical investigation, and it has to be a systematic investigation to be considered as scientific. And therefore, it is important that we kind of develop indices. Merton argues that to study abstract concepts like social cohesion, sociologists must find an external fact that symbolizes it. So, social cohesion is not only kind of coming together in, say, a physical area or regional, it could have multiple, it could have a symbolic meaning, it could have an emotional meaning. Now, how are you going to define it? It can only be explained with reference to another external fact. This symbol is called an index, and it must be perceptible and measurable sign of an otherwise unobservable concept. The ideal is one-to-one correlation between the index and the concept it signifies. Here he is giving us the example of indices from Emil Durkheim's insight, and he knows that Durkheim understood this principle. Even his indices were crude. For example, he used suicide rate as an index of social cohesion. Now, as already stated in the beginning of the lecture, that these are all subjective and are kind of culturally specific. So, in terms of Durkheim's study, cohesion could be responsible for the increased rate of suicide. So, what is the external symbolic with which the index is being developed is whether the rate of suicide is high, and he says if the rate of integration or social cohesion is low, suicide would be high. But then it is not necessarily that in every society the social cohesion could be explained with reference to suicide. Next, it talks about operationalization. This process is a core part of what is known as operationalization in research. It is why sociologists develop attitude scale or use ecological statistics as indices for social structure to make the concept measurable and therefore researchable. This text provides a final illustration of how research clarifies concepts using the sociological idea of multiple social roles and role constraint. The concept holds that individuals have multiple roles. So, you are a profession, you have a family member, and in less integrated society, they are more likely to experience conflicting demand from these roles. While this concept is common in sociological texts with familiar example like the professional women or the Catholic communist, Merton implies that these discursive illustrations are not substitute for the precise clarification that empirical research requires. The need to actually measure and test for role strain. Role strain is when you have multiple role and one role is restricting you from performing another task. So, there is a strain. So, here he says that the role strain pushes sociologists to define the concept far more clearly than a simple textbook example ever could. So, when we read chapter 5 of the book, that is Social Theory and Social Structure, we get a very clear idea in terms of how research in sociology contributes to the initiation, reformulation, redefinition and clarification of data and overall the four tasks leads to the development of theory. And so, it is advisable that we read the original text by a book by Robert Merton, that is Social Theory and Social Structure. Thank you.